my right here to remind me to record, and I didn't. So I'm recording now. All right. Goodness. So I apologize for that. But anyways, okay, our agenda. Today we are going to talk about what is an individual childcare program plan. We will talk a little bit about statute and rule that apply to the use, the documentation, the training, and the review of an ICCPP in Minnesota. We will touch on why and how to develop an ICCPP. We will move into kind of toward the second half, the form, the actual form that DHS has created for the individual child care program plan. And with that, we will walk through the revised form that we have created to help our license holders comply with documentation requirements. We will talk about when an ICCPP is required. I will share with you a couple stories about, they are stories of children I've had in my care in the past. And I will share, names have been changed and stories have been merged a little bit, but I have these reflection stories available to kind of help you engage and think about how, the situation I went through might apply and help you understand the importance of an ICCPP. And so we'll, again, walk through each version of the childcare or the ICCPP form, the allergy version, as well as the special need version. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. I do also want to point out again, engagement is encouraged while very difficult in this large of a group, but our panel is going to be available to answer questions as best they can through the chat. And again, as Rena mentioned, if you can send those to everyone, we can all learn, or at least to the panel. All right, learning objectives. My hope is that after completing this training, you will be better prepared to define and explain individual childcare program plans, to be able to evaluate when an individual childcare program plan is required within licensed childcare centers in Minnesota, to identify Minnesota statute and rule that apply to the documentation, use, training, and review of an ICCPP, and really know where to find out more about individual childcare program plans and resources that are there to support you. I also hope that you are able to understand and demonstrate, truly be able to walk through and complete an individual childcare program plan using our DHS ICCPP form. So what is an individual childcare program plan? I want you to think about that and again, assess what your knowledge is of ICCPPs. So what an ICCPP is, truly, is it's a plan. And it is a plan that is used to describe an individual child's cognitive, physical, social, and emotional needs. And it's a place to document how your child care center specifically will implement that plan to meet those individual needs of the child within your child care center setting. Now, some people may be familiar with other common plans that are designed to address the individual needs of children, such as an IEP or an individual family service plan, or even a 504 plan. But again, as stated, an individual child care program plan is a specific term from Minnesota Rule 9503, different from an IEP or an IFSP or a 504 plan. But again, similar to those plans, that the goal is to be able to identify a child's needs and put together a plan to meet those needs. Often, if a child has one of these other types of plans, there may be mention to a child care environment, and other states rely on that sometimes. But here in Minnesota, we actually have identified that it's really critical for a child care setting to be involved and to have their environment recognized. And so creating an ICCPP specific to your child care setting really allows the child care environment to be assessed and to find ways within its environment to meet the goals of the child within the collective group of the child care program. So therefore, again, I feel very fortunate we recognize that here in Minnesota, and know that an ICCPP is valuable, because many children spend many hours in your programs and do really need have their needs met within childcare. An individual childcare plan, often referred to as an ICCPP, and I will often go back and forth between doing that, comes from Minnesota Rules, Chapter 9503.0065, where it states that an individual childcare program plan must be in writing, it must specify methods of implementation, it must be reviewed and followed by all staff who interact with the child, and the license holder must ensure that any additional staff qualifications or training required by the child's ICCPP are provided. While the requirements that need to be in an ICCPP are required in statute and rule does not specify or require you to use our DHS specific form. However, we do acknowledge that understanding when and how to develop an ICCPP can be complex for a variety of reasons. Therefore, we have talked with our various stakeholders, including health consultants, license holders, and all of our licensors as well have contributed. And because of that, we revised a couple years ago our DHS ICCPP form to be interactive, electronic, and as simplified as possible. We also do continue to hear feedback, and so we will make revisions, which we just did yesterday, or well, it was just launched yesterday. And so the most current version of the ICCPP is available on the Licensed Child Care Center webpage. And in that form, we feel it meets the most complete ways of a license holder being able, if you fill it out completely and accurately, doing so will help with meeting compliance requirements for documentation. Statute and rule that apply to the use, documentation, training, and review of an ICCPP in Minnesota. So before we really get into ICCPPs, I do want to state that, all of the work that we do here in Child Care Center licensing or from our licensing division really does revolve around statute and rule that apply to our child care programs that we, in our position, oversee and monitor for compliance. So speaking of licensing requirements, your licensor, as well as anyone from our licensing department, really do often talk in that language. And so you will hear us talk, we'll mention statute and we'll mention rule. And it is a requirement for license holders to have an understanding of all of the requirements that they are responsible for knowing. And so we also feel anytime we have a training like this, that it is important to give you a little history and where you can find out more about licensing. So specific to ICCPPs, you'll hear me say statute and rule and reference many numbers. But in general, there is a way you can look up on the Office of Revisor of Statutes website, which maintains a searchable site to all of Minnesota statute laws and rules. That information is in your handout at the end of the handout, as well as listed here on the slide. And just note a little bit about where our rules came from, as well as statutes. We work in Minnesota here. Our licensing rules and regulations are derived through the legislative process. So how that works here is that some statutes are required because our state is a recipient of federal block grant money. And for that reason, we must adhere as a state to federal requirements. So sometimes some of the things that come up in statute and rule or are proposed are because of requirements we as a state must follow. They go through the legislative process. And so our state does have an opportunity, our legislators have an opportunity, as well as constituents, to go through that process of the legislative process before, something comes out as a statute or a rule. But that's sometimes where things come from or start. In addition, there are other ways that statutes and rules come apart. Again, constituents throughout the state or various legislators or agencies can bring forth proposals to the legislature to have adopted into statute. And so when that happens, that's sometimes too where our rules or licensing or our standards come from. And so just a little history on that. License holders, again, are responsible for knowing and complying with the requirements of their license. And if you're interested in that exact language, again, reference that searchable site at the revisor of it's www.revisor.mn.gov. And so you'll be able to go there and search for statutes. In your handout, you'll see what I have built into this slide here, which kind of gives you a general reference of some of the main statutes and rules that over here on the left of the slide are the ones that we in our licensing unit are responsible for overseeing to make certain our license programs are compliant with. And so that is listed here on the slide on the left side. And my goal here today is not to overwhelm you in any way. However, developing an ICCPP and working as part of a business that works with families and young children, it is also important for you to know that they're outside of our licensing rules and regulations that we in licensing oversee would be some overarching federal disability laws that I feel it's important for programs who work with children and families to be aware of. And so I have those listed. And then I also here on the right of the slide have some of the explanations to some of the acronyms that I've mentioned about various other types of plans that are out there, and more. In your handout, you'll find links to more information on all of this, so that if you're interested in learning more or seeing where a lot of this information comes from, you will be able to do that on your own time. So, all right, moving on. Why and how to develop an ICCPP. As we move on, again, as mentioned, I want this to be reflective and meaningful for you. So if you would reflect on your experiences. I want this training to be meaningful. So if you can think about when have you created ICCPPs in the past? And what has your experience been? Has it just been, oh gosh, you know what? I have to do this because it's a requirement of my licensor and I'm going to fill this out and it's, a lot of work. And while we acknowledge that it can feel like a lot of work, what we want you to learn today is that this form or this, this ICCPP plan that you create can really be a tool for your program. But I want you to reflect on how you feel. Are you anxious when you have to create an ICCPP? Are you confused? Or are you excited because it's an opportunity for you to kind of assess the needs of a child and work with your program to be able to meet those needs? So just understand that throughout our whole group here, we might have a lot of varied feelings and experiences. And so I just want everyone to feel safe with their questions and know that we here understand that everybody's experiences are very different. And there's no one right way to do this. We're just kind of trying to help you along in the ways that we know or that I personally know might benefit you in your role as you're developing an ICCPP. And with that, we want you to understand that there are many resources out there. And again, as I've mentioned, your licensor and our licensor on call are available for questions you may have related to an ICCPP requirement, such as when is needed or what is required to be documented. They will be able to answer you questions on training requirements associated with an ICCPP or an ICCPP. In addition to our department, though, this slide here displays many additional resources that are available statewide for you all to know about and to think about as you recognize the varied needs in your program and while you're creating an ICCPP. I'm not going to go in detail about each of them, but I have provided links for more information in your handout to many of these incredible resources. But as a bonus today, we do have, as I've mentioned before, 2 speakers here from the Center for Inclusive Childcare, and we're going to hear from them. So we've got, it's my great pleasure to introduce the Center for Inclusive Childcare's Executive Director, Priscilla Weigel, and lead coach JC Nylander here to share a bit about the Center for Inclusive Childcare and how they might be able to support your program as you are determining the varied needs of children and your staff within your programs. And so I'm going to pass things over to Priscilla and JC for to give you a little information.
Great. Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. This is a huge group of people, and we're super excited to see a lot of familiar names on the list of attendees. And the Center for Inclusive Childcare is really set up to support all of you in the work that you're doing every day, caring for children and families. And we are here as a comprehensive resource network. We provide a place through our website where we gather tools and resources similar, so some are related to self-study courses and content that can help you further your education around children with varying needs and child development. We have podcasts, we have tip sheets that you can download and share with families, and they're on topics like biting, challenges related to behavior, active supervision, and how that works with children with special needs. So we really try to provide things that you see as helpful. So we want to hear from you as to what is missing on our website and what you feel is really helpful. We're funded by the Department of Human Services, and we're here as a free service to all of you. We also have a wonderful program that is really the largest part of our organization, and that is our coaching support. And so I'm going to hand it off to JC, who leads our coaching team with her colleague Brenda Lowe. And JC is going to tell you a little overview about what the coaching can do to support you in your childcare settings.
Awesome. Thanks, Priscilla. Yeah, so our coaching program, we offer coaching, as Priscilla said, that's free to all of you for center-based programs and family childcare programs. So how that works, a coach comes out, we have a hybrid model, so virtual, some virtual and some in person, and can work with you on a variety of topics. I mean, everything from behaviors that challenge to how do I implement this ICCPP? Now, how is that going to look in my classroom? A coach can help support you through that. Developmentally appropriate practice, teamwork, you name it, our coaches can come in and help you, either the leadership or educators in the program think through and set up some goals and action items to get to wherever you want to be. So that's why we're here today. Implementing some of this licensing requirements can be feel like a lot, and on paper it can look a little different than coming into your classroom and doing the actual work. So that's what our coaches do, is support providers like you. So thank you.
Well, thank you both for sharing.
Yes.
I had, back in my days working in a childcare center, I had the great benefit of working with one of the coaches throughout a situation. We had a wonderful staff in a program, but they were just struggling with trying to figure out how to best meet all of the needs of the children in their care. And so we worked with a coach who provided so much encouragement and great knowledge to our staff, as well as really helped build connections with the family so that the family also was able to get connected with some resources that were beneficial to them. So I personally can speak highly of the work that the Center for Inclusive Childcare does. And I want to say too, I am a member of the Child Care Center Licensing Unit. However, a lot of these things that I will say are my personal experiences. And but we as a DHS program do help support the Center for Inclusive Childcare because it is recognized as such a valuable resource to all of the programs throughout the state of Minnesota. And, you know, for all of the children, I feel like every child has needs and they're all special. And so to think of that and to realize that, you know, there are resources out there in our state that can help is so important and just makes me feel good about the work that everyone is doing and that we are all partners in doing this work together. So thank you all for being here. Priscilla and JC are going to stay available for questions and to kind of continue on with our conversation here. And I do want to say first, before I move into this next part of the conversation, I thank you all for sharing some of the information about your reflections in the chat. I didn't get a chance to really read them fully, but I do want to say some of the questions we will be addressing that that have come up, and your reflections are amazing. Um, they are varied. They're exactly what I expected. Some people are confused. Some people are like, I'm here because I really need to know what I need to learn. And then other people are saying they like the form, they like being able to do them, they love being able to kind of assess and figure out how their program is best able to meet the needs of the children that they serve. And so thank you for sharing. I know our panelists are going to work really hard to navigate through the chat to find questions. So bear with them as well.
That's why I jumped on, turned my camera on, Lisa. Thank you, Priscilla and JC, but I also did want to let people know that so many of the questions being asked, we are going to get to in our presentation. You know, a lot of this is very foundational, and so be patient. Lisa has a plan, but also I want to say, if you have a very, very specific question, like I have a child with this condition, or, you know, those types of things, sometimes it's hard for us to, you know, lead you down the right path in a webinar with hundreds of people. And so I know at one point, one of the licensors said, you know, if you have a very specific question on should I do this, or, you know, how should I move forward with this particular situation, reach out to your licensor and we can really individually offer the support you need. But we'll continue plugging through both the information that Lisa has planned, and then obviously, you know, answering questions as they come up in the chat. So thank you for your, as Lisa said, active participation. We really appreciate that as well.
We
Thanks.
really do. It makes it very valuable. All right, we're going to move into the benefits of an ICCPP, because again, beyond the obvious that an ICCPP is required in statute and rule to be developed in a licensed child care center anytime there's a child with and has been identified with a known allergy or other type of special need. Beyond that, I kind of want to shift your thinking, as many of you did already say in the chat, that this putting together this plan is really a tool, and it is a tool that can be very beneficial to your program. And that is the purpose behind having an individual childcare program plan. And again, why I'm really grateful we have recognized that childcare deserves to have the opportunity to be recognized as a very important place in a child's life. So beyond that requirement piece, it's important to realize that putting together a program is a way, and a plan is a way to support the child's individual needs. It puts a child in place to find success, to receive equitable services, and it could also be an opportunity or a way to kind of connect through the process, connect families with additional services and a better understanding of their child's need. In fact, having a good plan and developing an ICCPP provides an opportunity that the entire group's needs can be identified, and all the children in the group are receiving inclusive and equitable care. So by assessing and preparing to develop an ICCPP for a child with a need, you have a chance to kind of take a deeper look at the dynamic needs of the entire group, because as we know, each group of littles provides its own landscape of needs. They have their own personalities, and each group is different. And so this, when you have the opportunity to create this because of a child who has a special need, it is an opportunity to really take a closer look at the entire group and figure out how to make things work for everyone. An ICCPP will allow you to really look at and identify the needs of the staff in the classroom and how you, whether it's you, if you might be the staff in the classroom here in this training, but the ICCPP plan is really an intentional plan to allow staff to have the resources available and the information they need to do their jobs and to do it well. So putting together a plan can really help staff gain tools and strategies for their work within a group setting and for understanding the children in their care. It is always important too to think about ways to help staff feel supported and prepared and capable of their responsibilities. Always, those are ways that we can lead in programs to staff retention. Having an ICCP in place for a child with a special need, with a need for family support, offers an opportunity for family support and partnership. Most likely, the goal for all programs out there that we all strive for is for that partnership with families within your center. And families often see you in childcare as their main source of information and support. Working together to coordinate care and develop an ICCPP is a great way to build that interconnected and consistent relationship with the family. And then as far as contracted services go, often children have contracted services as part of their care plans. For example, a child might have someone in to spend time with them from the school district, or say maybe a speech therapist or an occupational therapist comes in to your program. When that happens, having an ICCPP in place allows for coordination. It is a way for each perspective to work together, which again benefits the children in so many ways. It also allows your program to make considerations that you might need to think about that are licensing related, such as, if you have contracted services or someone coming into your program, it helps you to remember and kind of coordinate that, whether or not you have to think about supervision needs and or possible other background study requirements. And so putting this plan together really just allows you to kind of take a step back and put together, a full plan so that you are, meeting the needs of the child while at the same time protecting your program. So if you recognize all of these extensive benefits, and instead of just seeing an ICCPP as a requirement, you will see that it truly is a tool to support your program in varied ways. So how do you do that? How do you put together a plan? So we're going to talk about gathering and assessing needs. And when you go about, planning for an ICCPP, and looking at the ways it will benefit all of these different ways, what you're going to want to really do is you're going to assess the child's needs. You're going to gather information. You're going to look through information given to you by parents. It's a good time to ask questions. Parents are going to be your partner in this venture, so seeking their knowledge and asking questions. Ask if there has been coordination with a physician, or if a child has a medical plan, or say another plan such as an IEP or an IFSP. Depending on the reason behind the ICCPP, maybe ask to observe the child. Ask if the child has outside service contracts. And if the child is already enrolled in your program, ask the team of staff who currently work with the child to weigh in on helping develop the plan based on their observations and experiences. What you're going to want to assess the environment. What that could mean is if you have a child who will be using, say, a wheelchair, will the environment work as it currently is set up? You may need to move some things around or work on ways to make the room accessible. At the same time, say you have a child who has been diagnosed with possibly on, say, the autism spectrum, and one of their little things that they like to do is run when they become overwhelmed. I've had a few runners in my day, and having the opportunity to really kind of just assess the environment helped with figuring out ways to prevent my little runner from getting away. So assessing your environment might look different based on the needs that you have in your care, in your classroom or in your program. So, and then you're going to want to consider again the group aspect. You will look at the group needs and think of ways that the child with the need is more like the other children than is different. So it's very important that we remember that while we are creating this program plan, that child is probably more like the other children than they are different. And so always recognizing that and building their strengths is a super important goal to remember and consider. And then 2, you're going to consider your staffing needs based on your assessments. You're going to need to consider staffing scenarios and needs. And I understand staffing is a big issue these days. We know that and recognize that so much. And we appreciate all that you're striving to do with very limited staff these days. But assessing their needs and really providing them with the support is, again, a way to retain staff. And so while it's hard sometimes to get staff into your programs, you want to keep those staff when you do get them. And being able to provide them with the support they need. It might be, extra help during certain times of the day, or during transition times if there's a special need in their classroom. And kind of considering all of that and doing your best to try to figure out ways to support them is, again, really meaningful for your program. All right. Let's see here. ICCPP or training related to individual childcare program plans. We want to recognize, again, as a licensing division, there are training requirements associated with individual childcare program plans that must occur and be documented to ensure compliance. So you want to remember that as part of orientation training, license holders must train staff who are responsible for carrying out the child's ICCPP on the information in the ICCPP. License holders must train staff who are responsible for carrying out the child's ICCPP on the information in the ICCPP upon development of it and prior to a staff person newly caring for a child with an existing ICCPP, if that's applicable. Now, this could occur when a child is new to a program or already enrolled. So we want you to think about that. And remember that you will want to remember that all staff who are working with that child will need to have that training. So, if a child moves from a classroom to another classroom, you want to ensure, for whatever reason, you want to ensure that the staff working with that child has the ICCPP training needed. License holders must ensure updates to each child's ICCPP occur as needed. And when that happens, they must train staff who are responsible for carrying out the child's ICCPP. So whenever there's a change, that training needs to occur for the staff caring for that child. Each child's ICCPP, again, whether a special needs version or an allergy version, must be evaluated each calendar year at least once. And as part of yearly in-service training, you will train your staff who are responsible for carrying out the child's ICCPP on the information in that plan, even if there are no changes. So that's important too. So each year you're going to train on it, and again, anytime there are any changes. Do note, documentation must be kept clearly to show each ICCPP that the child, with the child's name that the staff person is working with, has received the training on. And so clear documentation of that training is a way, again, to help your program meet compliance and make certain that your licensor is able to see that. And so we've built that into our form, and we're going to talk now about our DHS Childcare ICCPP form. So, because we do recognize there's a lot to keep track of related to these ICCPP requirements, we created that DHS ICCPP form. It has, again, statute does not require that you use our form, but we create forms and resources to help you meet documentation requirements. And so most of our programs are using our form, and do know that, you know, when things come up maybe through a legislative session that require new updates in documentation, we as a licensing division work very hard to ensure that our forms do get updated as soon as they possibly can, so that if you're using our latest version of our forms, you will also be able to make certain that you're meeting those requirements if you're filling them out, you know, completely and properly. We do continue to listen to feedback as well, and that also could be a reason why we revise forms. And so just last week, you know, our Child Care Center licensing unit did send out a Gov Delivery email informing our authorized agents that our ICCPP form was being updated. So the latest version, as I mentioned earlier, just became live on our website last night and is available on our webpage as well as linked in your handout. All right.
We have had some questions in the chat to ask about
Okay.
the new version that you're speaking about. You know, specifically, some people have said they've had trouble opening it, and then some people have also said that they have, you know, gone through it and perused it and can't figure out what is different. And so I just want to make sure that everyone understands that the only thing that is different is that we specifically carved out a space on the ICCPP. So if you choose special needs ICCPP, and at the very end in the staff sign off section, we make sure that there is a space that will allow you to sign off even if you choose no changes. So it was something that was missed. It's always been a requirement that staff sign off as part of your in-service training requirement. So in 245A40 under in-service, that's where it specifically requires licensed centers to have staff who are responsible for carrying out the ICCPP sign off on their annual review and be trained on that annual review for that child that they interact with. And so some programs do not do it right on the ICCPP form. Some programs document it in other places. The only thing that, so the other question was, do we need to throw away the forms that we're currently using and redo forms? And we don't want everyone to have to redo all new forms. Just when you are going to, you know, create a new ICCPP, make sure that you're using the most updated form. And then secondly, you just need to make sure that as part of that training requirement, so again, under in-service training, that all of your staff, however you're going to document it, whether it be on that ICCPP or somewhere else, are being trained once during a calendar year. So I hope that creates some clarity as to what's changed. Sometimes it gets brought to our attention that little nuances are missing from our forms, and so we make that quick adjustment. And then in the Gov Delivery that was sent out, and I can pop the language into the chat as well from what was in the Gov Delivery, we tried to create clarity around what is required and when it's required. So
Yes.
hopefully that clears things up. And then Lisa, does the handout at all tell them how to open our DHS forms if they're struggling?
Yes. And we're
Perfect.
actually going to go through that next. So
Okay.
yes.
Perfect.
So
Thank
we
you.
I still find it challenging sometimes to use some of our forms. So we all recognize that it can be tough. So we did build that into the training. And so
Okay. Thank you very much.
oh, absolutely. Thank you for adding in. I see all the stuff coming into the chat, but I'm not able to look at it. And so I appreciate our panel being able to read through that and pop in as you need. So about our DHS ICCPP form, I'm not going to really go over too much about this because a lot of it has been addressed already, but a couple of things to add, you know, is that, you know, while it is an electronic form that you can fill out online, there's ways to do that. And I'm going to go on that next. But while you're doing that, it is important to recognize too that there are some areas that are not able to be filled out electronically. And so we encourage you to do as much as you possibly can electronically on the interactive form. And then when there's certain areas that must require like a verifying signature, not an electronic, there's both of those options. When they apply, they're written out there on our form. So if an electronic signature is allowable per statute, then we have that built into the form. for you to do that electronically. However, if it's not something that can be done electronically and we need an actual signature, you'll want to fill out the form as much as you can, print it out, and then capture those signatures on the form if you're going to do that documentation on our form. And again, as Michelle said, you can also do that other ways. Just, again, making certain that you have that available for your licensor when they are checking for that documentation. So the form itself, and this little chart is in your handout, so I'm not going to go real deep into it, but our form can be found on our Licensing Child Care Center webpage under our forms and documents. Another thing to note is you will want to retain the ICCPP in your records for at least 5 years beyond a child's enrollment or attendance in your program. We do understand that opening their forms can be tricky, so oftentimes that has more to do with the computer or what browser you're using than it is the actual form. So I encourage you sometimes to check a different browser. And what that means is if you're opening up in Edge or Chrome or something else, if one isn't working, you can certainly try one of the others because that's sometimes the issue. When you do open up our form, there are instructions that you will want to follow closely and carefully. They include saving the form to your desktop and then opening it in an Acrobat reader, which is a free software that you can search for and download to your system. So when you fill out these forms, it's important that you download it, save it to a file, a private file on your computer, and then go to that file instead of sometimes it pops up and says open here. What I've found to be best is if I go to the actual file I've saved it in, pull it from go to where it's at in my files where I've saved it. And if within there, you can usually right click and it will allow you to open with. And if you have Adobe, open with Adobe Reader, and then it will pop open and then you'll be able to fill it out. And when you save it, it will save. Because if you don't save it within that Adobe program, you might likely lose some of the information. And so we understand that's confusing. There's information in your handout about this. If you have, or continually have issues with our forms, certainly let us know, and we can try to help you work through them. It's gotten better. A few years ago, everybody was really struggling, but we've really recognized that a lot of people have kind of learned this process now. So, okay. This is what the form sort of looks like. So here's a quick visual of what the DHS ICCPP Form 7995 looks like. And as you can see here, circled up on the right is the date of when it was last revised. So 7 is July of 2024. If you have a version that is older than that, it likely will have a slight variation. Doesn't mean that, again, we're not asking you to throw anything out and start over. It just sometimes means that you'll want to recognize that if we've created a new version, it's because there's been either a revision that's required or we have found a better way to help our license holders document things. And so if you're going to use, create a new one, always go to our website and pull the latest. All right, we're going to move into when is an ICCPP required. So basically, the answer to that question is anytime a child has been identified with a special need. Developing an ICCPP is important so that your program can ensure that the child's needs are identified and are being met, including if a child has a known allergy. And I say including that because statute 245A.41 specifically has specific details to be included on an ICCPP that are specific to a child with a known allergy. So again, we have created 2 different versions of our form. They are all part of the same form, but because the form is interactive, you're able to make different choices along the way. So we'll show you that. So here as we previously identified, the purpose of this ICCPP is to develop a plan that can meet the child's individual needs. And then you're going to designate here whether you're choosing the option of the form that is developed for a known allergy or the version of the form for a child that has a special need requiring an ICCPP. As you see on our form, we put links in our form so that you have opportunities to go directly through that link and read the exact detail that comes from statute or rule, so that you have an opportunity to, kind of just, learn more as you're going along. The two versions of the ICCPP are designed to document specific information and requirements of each type that is needed. So again, two versions that are a little different based on what is required to be documented. We've also provided built-in links again on each of the form for more information. And now we're going to dive into the form itself, and we're going to go into the version of an allergy. And before we do that, I'm going to give you a little scenario here, and you're going to meet Nico. So this again is based on my own personal experiences with Nico and how our program worked at developing an ICCPP with his family to help make sure that we were able to meet his needs as best as possible within our program and within our, our environment. So we assessed the child's needs. We gathered information from parents. We looked at healthcare summaries and any other information that we could find. When Nico was joining our program, we looked at all of that. In the case of Nico, as he was joining our program, he was a 16-month young toddler. During our intake process, we met with his parents and discovered that he had a known dairy allergy. He was allergic to cow's milk and had some fairly quick and somewhat alarming reactions in the past. His reactions came after either ingestion or by topical exposure to the skin. His parents shared that in the past he would develop a rash, start showing some increased mucus and congestion, and his voice would become scratchy. His reactions seemed to be increasing slightly or depending on the degree of exposure. And so his parents worked with their physician and put together a medical action plan with very specific details of how to respond to an exposure. He seemed to respond well to minor treatments and hadn't had to have the use of an EpiPen yet. But because things seemed to be changing a little bit, his physician did prescribe an EpiPen as part of his plan in case his reaction was that severe. Let me tell you, honestly, we were quite nervous about this. We were like, wow, this is going to create some changes in our toddler area and our classroom. But we worked together and we came up with a plan. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about that as we walk through the ICCPP allergy form. So you'll hear more about Nico in a bit. First of all, as we've already determined in rule and statute, that if a child has a known allergy, you must develop an ICCPP. And because Minnesota statutes 245A.41 designate that there are specific requirements for that. In addition, 9503 in rule talks about that an ICCPP must be in writing, specify methods of implementation, and be reviewed and followed by all staff who interact with the child. That Minnesota statute section 245A.41 subdivision 1 states that before admitting a child for care, the license holder must obtain documentation of any known allergy from a child's parent or legal guardian or the child's source of medical care. If a child has a known allergy, the license holder must maintain current information about the allergy in the child's record and develop an individual child care program plan as specified in Minnesota Rules 9503.0065 subpart 3 and the specifics of 245A.41. People often ask us at this time, they'll say, do I really need to do an ICCPP for a child if say their allergy isn't something major or they don't have big reactions? And the simple answer to that is yes, because as pointed out here, anytime there is a known allergy, an ICCPP is required. And why that is that way is because, say for example, a child is allergic to cats, but you don't have cats at your center. Well, do you need to develop an ICCPP? Answer to that would be yes, because while you may not have cats at your program, you still could have a staff member or another child who does, and could have cat dander on their clothes and cause a reaction. And now, don't want to alarm anybody about, people bringing in cat dander. Obviously that happens. It's just important to note that if a child has a really strong reaction, you're going to want to know how to work around that and maintain that and or, deal with that in your program. And so it is important to have a plan put together so that your staff are able to recognize what's happening and have a plan in order to deal with it if there is a reaction. As well, your program, there are ways that your program will want to work to try to prevent reactions. And so knowing this information is important, and the plan, and which is why a plan would be in place. Another example, we often are asked that, okay, say a child has a known allergic reaction to a medication such as like amoxicillin, and you know that the parents know that, and you know that the doctor knows that. And so you know that it's very unlikely the child will ever have amoxicillin prescribed. So you wonder, do I really need to put together an ICCPP? This child's probably not going to have amoxicillin here. Well, think about it this way. Another child at the program could be prescribed amoxicillin. And I've, again, worked with infants and toddlers for many, many years to know that oftentimes when you're, giving a dosage of amoxicillin, oftentimes a child might spit it out. And then, depending on the child's reaction, the child with the allergies reaction, you don't know unless you have documentation to really understand how severe that child's reaction is. And so it is important to put together a plan to think through these scenarios. And that is why anytime there is a known allergy, an ICCPP is required to be in place. All right. The information is very important in order to care for the child in your program and ensure that staff are prepared to do their job effectively. So, and in my example of Nico and his allergy, the information that we gained right away was so important and valuable for us to be able to meet his needs from day one, as well as make certain our staff were prepared. Requirements from 245A.41 also specify that licensed programs must create a policy for preventing and responding to allergies. You must train all your staff on your allergy policy during orientation and at least once a year or following any changes or updates to an ICCPP. You want to ensure staff review and follow the plan. And for a child with a known allergy, you must maintain current allergy information in the child's record and develop an ICCPP as required in Minnesota Rules 9503.0065. An ICCPP with allergy-specific details. So those specific details from 245A.41 subdivision 1 do state that the ICCPP for a child with a known allergy must contain a description of the allergy. The plan must call out specific triggers, avoidance techniques, symptoms of an allergic reaction, and it must include procedures for responding to an allergic reaction, including medication, the dosage, and contact information if that's applicable. Because statute requires these specific details, licensors are required to monitor that each of these specific requirements are addressed on the ICCPP, whether you're using our form or not. So even if they seem obvious, it's really important that you complete that information in the fields that we have on our form or wherever you're creating your ICCPPs, and ensure that nothing is left blank. That is specific to this type of ICCPP. We're often asked about allergy action plans and ICCPPs. So oftentimes a child might have an allergy action plan from their source of medical care. And it is not required as part of an ICCPP that a child does, but they might have one. And so it's important to kind of understand the differences there and know that a doctor's name and contact information is required on an allergy ICCPP. But because there is no requirement for a signature or consultation from a source of medical care, an allergy action plan would not be necessary for licensing purposes. However, an allergy action plan might help a center complete an ICCPP and coordinate, that allergy action plan would be considered, coordination with that would be considered a best practice. If a center has an allergy action plan that meets all of the requirements of an ICCPP, that could be used as an ICCPP and not, an additional form would not be required. However, throughout all of our years in licensing, we really have not seen allergy action plans that meet all of those requirements that are posted in Minnesota Statutes 245A.41 subdivision 1. And therefore, you'd really want to ensure that that allergy action plan met all of those requirements as required, and you would have to, add that information. So oftentimes what's recommended is that if a child has an allergy action plan, it's a useful document to be used as part of their ICCPP plan or in conjunction with. And so that's often how we've answered that in the past. All right, on the form, this is what you would see once you open the form and save it, and you choose here, this is where you would choose to use the allergy version of the ICCPP form. Once you make that form, the form will open to include areas where you will describe the allergy. So in the case of Nico, here where I would say that, I'm describing his allergy, I would fill in that he has a dairy allergy. Other examples in this area that are common or common allergies could be seasonal allergies or maybe animal hair and dander or possibly a latex allergy. We do understand that sometimes there may be multiple allergies that a child has, and sometimes they can be grouped together with similar triggers, symptoms, and avoidance and response techniques. And therefore, we have designed the form so that, if that is the case, you can list them all and include all the information on this one form. So for example, if a child is allergic to dogs and also is allergic to seasonal allergies, but they tend to react the same way and say they possibly get itchy and congested or whatever, and the response would be the same with maybe a prescribed antihistamine, then you could use this form here and list both in the same area. However, if a child has two very different types of allergies, say for example, they might have a food allergy to something that causes a mild surface reaction, but then also has a very severe reaction to a bee sting. We recognize that could be confusing, and in the past we asked for two different ICCPPs to be developed. But what we've done is we've created our form to have additional sections that will open up and allow you to fill in the specific information for each type of very different allergy. And so so just know as you kind of walk through our form, make the choices you make, provide more additional information and opportunities for you to fill information out. And so that's why we've created it to be dynamic in that way so that you can document everything you need to in one place. Triggers and symptoms. So as mentioned, you must fill out the area here about triggers, what triggers the allergy. So there are common allergy triggers that might include, say airborne allergens such as pollen, animal dander, dust mites, and mold. It could be certain foods or particular peanuts, tree nuts, wheat, soy, fish, shellfish, eggs, and milk. Those are common. Insect stings, such as from a bee or a wasp, are could be an allergy that triggers an allergy. Common allergy triggers might also include latex, elastic, certain chemicals within products, such as certain sunscreens, or a child could have a medication allergy, and the trigger then would be the type of medication. There could be plenty more, but those were just some of the common ones that we have seen. And so after you fill out that open area about what triggers the allergy, then you could either check one of the boxes of the common symptoms that might appear, which are, common symptoms, could be any of these listed here, itchy or tingling or swelling of the lips. They could have skin hives or rashes. That one of their common symptoms could be, gut related, throat related, where they're having difficult swallowing. So we've listed those there for ease, and we've provided an other area for you to fill out if there's a different type of symptom that a child might show. It is also important to kind of remember that in childcare, oftentimes children's first exposure to allergen could happen there. So in the childcare setting. So beyond the specific ICCPP, that allergy training that you have for your staff, an important piece or a tip that you could include might be helping staff understand and be prepared to watch for these common symptoms in children in all care. It is part of, that reason rule does spell out other details, such as, for infants, it asks about infant diets and prescribed dietary needs. And those are other areas, again, where you might see a child have their first reaction. And so having staff be aware of what symptoms could look like is really, important preventative tool to have in your toolbox. All right. The next part of the form here opens up to provide an area for you to give information about what techniques will be used to avoid an allergic reaction. And then it also has what procedures will be taken to respond to an allergic reaction for the child, the named child. So these areas of the form are required information again, so you can't leave either of these areas blank. And this is a common area where people are often confused about what to enter. So remember, when you're working to make this plan as beneficial as possible to you, you're going to want to write details. And so oftentimes, and I've heard this from our licensors, we'll often see people fill out this area and they'll often write that a child, or, so say, for example, a child has a peanut allergy, and you're going to, as a staff, or as a program, you acknowledge that, child has a peanut allergy, so your technique would be to avoid the allergic reaction, and you might write in here that you're going to avoid peanuts, which is ideal. However, what we really want to see in this section is how are you going to avoid those peanuts, or how are you going to avoid whatever it is that might trigger a child's reaction, allergic reaction. And so putting the detail in there is super important. So, again, in the instance of a peanut allergy, you could state that you're going to avoid peanuts by having your classroom be peanut free, or you plan to inform classroom parents of the child without naming the child, but just stating that you have a child with a peanut allergy, and that the child, you have a child in the classroom with a known peanut allergy. And so those more specific details are really helpful, and really what our licensors are looking for when they're looking at the ICCPP to again see that the plan is effective. Another type of scenario, you might have a child who is prescribed a preventative allergy medication, or maybe receives, say, a monthly allergy shot. So in this area here, you could include that as an avoidance technique. You could say that, a child is going to have preventative a shot. And while it might not occur in your program, this information is super helpful to staff to know because, for example, say a child does have an allergy shot each month and they come to the childcare program once each month with a sore arm. And it's just helpful for your staff to have that awareness so that they know how to best, understand where a child is at and meet their needs based on some of this information. That's super important. So if if parents communicate that with you, it's important for you to kind of just be aware of and fill this out as best as you can. All right. So as you can see, it's very important to think through what is in your written plan and how it could be beneficial. And then this next question on the form to fill out is what procedures will be taken to respond to an allergic reaction for a child? So this is where you will want to provide details about the way your staff will respond if this child is exposed to a trigger, and especially if they begin to show symptoms of a reaction. So this is where you are, you are thinking about what to write down in this area. As you think about that, and in any scenario you might be thinking about already now in your head, think about my friend Nico, and whose allergy to milk was not just about ingestion, it was also exposure, and that it was very immediate. So when we thought through that, we realized that he could, possibly have a reaction not just to drinking milk accidentally, but if he got milk on him. So when we learned that information, it kept us very much on our toes, and it really got us thinking as a program. So in my example, we actually had to put a very extensive plan in place. We had a very detailed plan to avoid the allergic reaction. And in our toddler classroom, one big piece of our program, and a part that Nico's parents did not want us to change, was that as part of our curriculum, even our youngest children in the toddler room there poured their own milk from small pitchers into their cups. And so here's us learning this information about this new child coming into our program with an reaction to milk. And we, our first reaction was we need to change what we're doing, and we would have. However, believe it or not, Nico's parents asked us not to because they said they really believed in our program and they wanted him to be able to learn early on how to handle, his allergy, because they knew he couldn't live in a world it was their choice and their decision that he not be completely unexposed or not able to participate in certain things. And so what we did as a staff, we with this new little person coming into our room that had a milk allergy, we were very nervous, very conflicted, but we discussed our choices. And what we did is we put a very, very detailed plan in place. We had staff that really were aware of what was going on. They participated in developing the ICCPP, and they were very devoted to making sure that this worked for Nico, for his parents. And so his parents, and they met with their physician to ask about, if this was okay. And we all worked together to put together a workable plan. And we really knew that it was essential to have all our staff on board. And so again, in this example, we, what we did is we put together a plan that no one even had to question because we all knew it so well. So we had, let's see my notes here. We never wanted Nico to feel singled out. And so we put together, like at lunchtimes or anytime we had milk in our program, we had a very small table placed up next to our classroom table. So we, as you can picture it, we had a rectangle table, and then at the end we put a little circle so that Nico could sit at the circle and have less of a likelihood of ever having any milk spilt on him, because if somebody at the larger table had a spill, it wouldn't fall onto his table, but he would still be part of the large group. So we worked on that. We put that in place. We put, you know, we had some like porous rags available, so that if there was a spill, everybody always knew that where they were and how to clean things up. We would position little Nico's chair so he would be part of that group, but we would always position a staff to sit at his table and make certain that they were really aware and keeping an eye out so that there was no milk being spilt in his direction. And that at the same time, he was able to meet all of his social needs in that group and be included. Staff were trained and prepared to watch for and alert each other of any cleanup of cow's milk that needed to be, happen. They would also assist little Nico as he would, bus his meal dishes. And of course, he did not have cow's milk in his pitcher. He had his own specific pitcher of an alternative that was prescribed for him. So as you listen to this, you can see that it was very detailed. We had to include everybody. Everybody really needed to know. We made it work. He did not, have reactions to any milk that he was being exposed to at the center. There was a day he came in to the classroom having milk because Grandma and Grandpa had him in the car and he had milk exposure on him. And so we did have to follow our plan and, go through what we were going to do when we started to see symptoms. But within our program, he was always able to follow along and not have anything happen because we really had a plan in place that worked for him. So as you can see, important information. Other things to consider is you want to make certain your staff have access to ICCPPs and know where things are that they might need. So for instance, if there's medication that is being stored somewhere, staff need to know where that is. There is, it's important to remember that they need to have access to a phone in case of an emergency, or like if there's a severe emergency or the use of an EpiPen, that they would call 911. And you want to make certain that staff are trained and prepared in case of any reaction. Again, Nico came in with one day and our staff started to notice he was showing things right away when he came in. And so we were able to jump into action and notify parents, and they were able to actually come. We never had to do the EpiPen, but they came right away, and they actually wanted to come and give him his Benadryl because that was part of his plan. So it worked out. All right. Okay. That was a lot of information, but I do think it's kind of valuable to kind of think about scenarios such as that and recognize that, we in licensing have all worked in childcare programs too. And so again, your license holder is a great wealth of information if you have questions, or our friends at the Center for Inclusive Childcare. These are areas where they too could help you figure out ways to make a plan work within the environment you have. And so reaching out, know that you're not alone. And know that, we are available. All of us are working to try to do what's best for the children and for you guys in your programs, because we want to see you succeed as well. Okay, moving on. Parent information is super important. License holder must contain the child's parent or legal guardian, or must contact them as soon as there's an instance of exposure. And so, or if there's any medication or medical intervention that happens. I'm going to keep rolling through here because we still have a long way to go and I'm running out of time. Medication. If a child has medication as part of the response, 245A specifies that the child has medication, or if they have medication as their response plan, the medication, the dosage, and the doctor contact is required to be included on the child's ICCPP. If medication is administered, be reminded that Minnesota Rule 9503.0140 subpart 7 does have specific requirements for medication administration, and so those also do need to be followed for licensing reasons. And Minnesota Statute 245A.41 subdivision 1E specifies that a license holder must call EMS when epinephrine is administered to a child while in a license holder's care. So, and with that, you also want to just know that if that happens where, medical care by an EMS is called while in your care, your licensor also must be alerted within 24 hours. And so those are all some things to keep in consideration. In the form here, the form asks if medications are required as part of an allergic reaction. So if you choose yes, the little box on the form here, and you pick that, a new section will appear. And as mentioned, medications for responding to an allergic reaction must be included on an ICCPP form, and you must have that medication name, the dosage, and the doctor contact information. There's an area where you fill in the required doctor information, the name and phone number, which is again required. And we all, as you can see here, we have built in into our DHS form a few instances where we place reminders and again links for more information so that you are aware of that. And here we do provide that reminder that if EMS is called, that you would need to, or if epinephrine is administered, you would need to call EMS. So we place those reminders in the form. Allergy information must be available at all times. It must be available on site, on field trips, during transportation. A child's food allergy information must be readily available to staff person where the food is prepared and where food is served to a child. Our licensors also ask that I stress that posting a list or a simple chart of known allergies with just names of children who have allergies is not sufficient. Sometimes it's done, and so we see that. So we wanted you to know that if you were to do something like that, you would have to ensure that all of the allergy information that is required is also posted. And so oftentimes that stuff does get left out. So it's important to recognize all of the allergy information is required. And the allergy information that is required is, again, a description of the allergy, those specific triggers, avoidance techniques, symptoms of an allergic reaction, and the procedures for responding to an allergic reaction, including the medication dosages and the doctor's contact information. So the child's record and confidentiality factors, that does factor in because there are rules regarding privacy. And so, it's important to note that children's records do specify that license holders shall not disclose a child's record to any person other than the child's parent or guardian, the child's legal representative, and employees of the license holder and the commissioner, which would be your licensor or DHS, unless the child's parent or guardian has given written consent or otherwise required by law. So we're often asked about posting ICCPPs, and so if you recall, I mentioned my friend Nico. Nico's parents and physician had put together an elaborate, detailed, chart kind of for us in our room that had information in addition to his ICCPP that we had created for us to post so that the staff were able, to be alerted, and recognize this quickly. But for us to be able to post that, whether they asked us for or not, we needed to document that we had their permission and that we were complying with Minnesota Rule 9503.0125. So because our licensors often see these situations, and we've heard feedback that they'd like, people would like this on the form, while it's not a requirement to post, we have created a part in the form where if your child or if your center does choose to post, you can obtain that parent permission on the ICCPP form, again, for ease of documentation. And as a reminder to think about it when you're putting together these plans on how you're going to do this information. Here's where you'll see that on the form. All right. And then for your staff that are caring for a child with an ICCPP for an allergy, staff who work with a child who has an ICCPP must be informed of the plan and agree to follow the plan. Staff must yearly sign even if there is no change to the ICCPP. Staff must be informed of any changes and again sign off that they have been informed and agree to plan or follow the plan. Staff training requirements also must be met, as we discussed earlier. So on the initial area of the form, we have an area for staff to sign and verify that they have received that training and agree to follow the ICCPP plan. In these instances, you will want to complete out the form out completely. As I mentioned earlier, you can do that, and then once the form is completely filled out, you would then print that form so that you could obtain the actual signatures here, because an electronic signature would not be available, something that would be able to be done. You would want an actual signature of your staff. So if you choose to document it in this manner on the form, you could add all your staff here because there's an add row, and you could then print off the completed ICCPP and have staff fill it out that way so that it's all in that one on that one form. And then the ICCPP allergy review requirements, again, they must be reviewed at least each calendar year or following any changes. And we have designed the DHS allergy form to ICCPP form with the options you can choose to designate which type of review it is. So you can choose on the form, there's two little buttons. You can either choose no changes at yearly review or changes at yearly review or as needed. And when whichever option you choose opens up a new section. And as you see here, this is what it looks like when there's an allergy review or yearly review with no changes. And what that does is it opens up the fields that are required to be documented. And so on this form here, even if there are no changes, the ICCPP center representative needs to review it and document that they have reviewed it. And each year, staff caring for the child named on the ICCPP must sign off that they have reviewed it and agree to follow the plan. And so that's, again, that section. And if there are no changes, then, if you choose the no changes button here, or I mean, actually, that there are changes, I'm sorry, if there are changes at the yearly review or throughout the year as needed, then you would choose that box on the form. And it, in addition to the signature areas for the staff representative and for all of the staff caring for the child, there's a field here that opens up to where you can, instead of having to create a whole new form, you can create or include the changes that have been made. Okay. I did not note early on that we would not have a break. I really apologize for that, but we are moving along, and we are going to now move into the section on the ICCPP for special needs. If you have to get up and stretch, I encourage you to do that, but I am going to show you or have you meet my friend Sasha. And Sasha is another child that I had in my care many years ago. And you're going to learn a little bit about her and a special need she had and how we created an ICCPP special need form for her. So reflect on some children that you have worked with while we go through this, and think about how this could work in your program as you hear about Sasha. So Sasha is a young preschooler. She has an amazing memory and loves to play interactively with her adult caregivers, often challenging them in complex memory games. She's super, super sharp. She was fun. She has a lot of energy, and she goes until she drops, and then often is really overdone and has a really hard time settling herself. Her muscle tone is really soft and rather floppy, and she tends to move around a lot, trying to get comfortable, really having a hard time doing so. When she's sitting on even one of our smaller or like our preschool chairs, she would often fall off, and she would often bump into things very easily. Walls, peers, tables. You've seen it. You know what I mean. Her parents had concerns, and their doctor determined that she could benefit from a caregiver who would understand and could support some of her sensory processing needs as she was growing and developing. They referred her to work with an occupational therapist who would come to our childcare program a few times a week. And then eventually, Help Me Grow did come in to do an assessment. And then later, Sasha would travel for part of the day away from our program to a specialized early education programming within her local public school district. At that point, 3 days a week, she would bus to and from our program to the school for part of her days. I can remember one time when we were meeting with Sasha's parents, I was able to really realize how important their partnership and that as we were developing this plan, it was not just for our center, but also for her family. So it was a really good way to work together with her family. They were amazingly loving family. They were very fortunate to have a lot of stabilities in their lives and support. However, even with that, they were really living it with increasingly, family stress, isolation, confusion, because they were just not sure what they could do to help Sasha along when she was, kind of struggling with some of these needs. And as she was growing, they were becoming a little bit more noticeable. So we really partnered with them. We worked closely to develop and seek support. They gained better understanding. We all gained awareness and new skills and strategies, as well as communication. And the load for this family really lessened because they were sharing it with people who cared, and we were working together. They were no longer alone. They felt like they were part of a team, and we were all working to do what we could collaboratively to meet Sasha's needs. And that's what we were all working to do, so, and I know that about all of you out there working. And so it was a really rich experience going through this ICCPP development for Sasha, because our family, their family and our staff were really working together. Because our staff were really involved, they felt empowered, and they were partners at helping Sasha meet Sasha's needs and their family needs as well. And these partnerships are so important with the families we work with in childcare. So it was, just valuable to sit down and be able to do this together. So more about Sasha in a bit here as we walk through as we did before, and we can do this. We've got time to finish through here because a lot of what I'm going to go through, you've already gotten a glimpse of what the form looks like, and so we're going to walk through the form here quickly and just talk through some situations as we develop an ICCPP for a special need. So as a reminder, those individual childcare program plans, it is a requirement that if you have a child who is identified with a special need, an individual childcare program plan must be developed to meet the child's individual need. The plan must be in writing. The plan must specify methods of implementation and be reviewed and followed by all staff who interact with the child. And so that is those are general requirements of all ICCPPs. Specific then, from Minnesota Rule 9503.0065, child care for children with special needs specifies that a child with a special need for this purpose means a child who is at least 6 weeks old but younger than 13 years old, who either has a developmental disability, has an IEP, IFSP, ISP, or a 504 plan, or has been determined by a licensed physician, psychiatrist, licensed psychologist, or licensed consulting psychologist to have a special need relating to their physical, social, or emotional development. At this time, as you prepare to create your ICCPP, you will again gather information and consider the needs of the child. You will consider the needs of your classroom and your environment. You'll consider the group aspect and consider the needs of your staff planning, training or support or professional development levels and growth areas for your staff. So just keep that in mind. All right, requirements that, you know, again, specific here, if a child has developmental disabilities, Minnesota Rule 9503.00065 states that the ICCPP must be coordinated with the child's ISP, IFSP, or 504 plan. If a child has one of those plans, the ICCPP must be coordinated with their individual education plan. So if a child has an IEP and is in school, this would be part of that coordination. If a child's special need has been determined by a licensed physician, a psychiatrist, licensed psychologist, or licensed consulting psychologist, then the ICCPP must be coordinated with reports from any of those professionals and must be evaluated at least yearly to determine, to determine if the child's needs are being met. That evaluation at least yearly or annually needs to be by the consulting professional and the child's parent. Additional considerations while developing the sort of ICCPP to consider or just think about is that Minnesota Rule Part 9503.0065 Subpart 4 states that license holders must have copies of all service contracts with the child or with the center for care or services provided for that child. So really what that means is if, say, there are service contracts or other plans that the information, those copies would be provided to your center and be included. Also, subpart 2 of Minnesota Rule 9503.0065 states that license holders must inform the parent of any diagnosed or identified special need of a child that was not reported by the parent at the time of admission. And so that's again where that's just basically stating that if your program has identified special concerns or somewhere else there's a diagnosis that has come into play, that parents are part of that conversation. I see you're on, Michelle.
I know, I always jump on when I want to make sure,
Okay.
and you know, I can clarify in the chat, but I also want to make sure in case somebody watches this, you know, slide later, the video, the recording, that the way that the law is written is that you are required to coordinate with the IEP. And so I just want to be really clear that you don't have to, like the law doesn't require that you have a copy of the child's IEP in your file. It does require that you coordinated with it. And so what that would look like in terms of a license or monitoring for it is that they should be asking for additional information to understand how you have coordinated with the child's IEP. Because I know we hear a lot that it's really difficult for people to get exact copies. Sometimes it's easy, and if you have it, great, but we just want to make sure that the law requires that you coordinate with the IEP and IFSP and all the other plans. And so I want to make sure that that's clear. And then I did put in the chat and just want to create a little bit of clarity around that too, because we are getting the question of it seems really redundant to have an IEP and then also require an ICCPP. And so I just want to say that the IEP contains information about like the child's performance, their goals, the special education and related services that the child is receiving, including like achievement tests, those types of things. What an ICCPP is for, and we've seen this comment in the chat, we've seen Lisa explain it, but that's about what changes are necessary for the program in order to meet these needs of the child. So it's kind of like, what do we do? So based on that you know, consultation with that other plan that you are doing, what needs to happen at the center. So even though it feels redundant, that is the requirement. So I just want to make sure that I'm really clear on that so that there's no confusion. Thanks, Lisa.
Yes, thank you. Yes, and I do see, just perusing the chat real quickly too, I do want to clarify too that you know, this type of ICCPP could be related to any type of special need, whether a child has a developmental disability or is some sort of you know, a developmental diagnosis or delay, I should say, or a physical, you know, such as you know, a child that might need a feeding tube or have some be in a wheelchair. So this type of ICCPP would be coordinated for any of those types of plans. And so I see Priscilla's on too, so she wants to add in something too.
I just wanted to add in one thing to kind of build off of what Michelle was saying. And we know that if you know that a child does have any of those other plans, an IEP or IFSP, to gain parent permission to be able to look at that plan, because we know that it'll help with the continuity of care between you as a provider and the special educator. And that is, you do need parent permission, that is a requirement. But we also know that it really is helpful to understand what that child is working on when they leave on that bus to go to that other program, as you were sharing, Lisa, about Sasha. And sometimes providers don't understand that they can ask for that information. And it also helps with that parent communication and building a really positive collaborative partnership with the family. So I just wanted to put that point that out.
And I'll add even to that, in IEP sometimes, and I have seen them where they will say, they might suggest that, oh, this should be done, or this should be part of the child's child care environment. So it's not like the child care environment is often left off. However, it doesn't always go into detail on how that can happen. You know, in your child care program that it takes some evaluating and figuring out how you're going to incorporate some of that coordination and collaboration. And so an ICCPP is specific to your environment, and it's how you as your program is going to figure out how to, again, maybe coordinate or collaborate with that plan. So thank you. We're gonna keep moving here because I'm looking at my time. Oh gosh, I hate when that happens, but thank you for the great questions. I'm seeing also too, a lot coming in, and we will continue to address as much as we possibly can. And I love your engagement. I do want to recognize too here, just because we are talking about additional considerations, is that just a reminder, Minnesota Statute Section 245A.11 subdivision 4 reminds us that the use of prone restraints is not allowed in licensed child care centers under any circumstance. However, if a child rolls into one, the child must be restored to a non-prone position. And if a child with a known medical or psychological condition has a contraindication for a type of restraint as part of their plan or their medical response, then it must be documented that that whatever type that is will not be used. And so this, if you're looking at where you might document that, documentation on the child's ICCPP would be something you could note under a restriction. And just a little extra so that if you see that, it's pretty rare, but if you do see that, could be a place to include that. So here again, here's the form. You're going to check that you're opting to use the version of the form that has any type of a special need, and again, that could be many types of different needs that a child has. You would check here, kind of narrowing it down, if the reason why is because they have a developmental disability, or if a child has another plan, or if it's because of a diagnosis that comes from any one of these professionals that are listed here. That could include, say, a seizure disorder, asthma, diabetes, a feeding tube, or a child receiving outside services such as physical or occupational therapy. And so anytime one of that encompasses a lot of different types of special needs, and then you would opt that, because whichever option you choose will open the form up to have a little bit different availability for what's next. And this next area of the form is where you will, you will pop up when you choose that you're having that special need option, and you will be asked to go through a similar process of answering questions as we did before. Only this time it's about modifications, accommodations, and restrictions as ways to implement the ICCPP and get your program thinking. So you will first describe the special need. So in the case of my friend Sasha, Sasha's special need was that her physician had diagnosed some sensory processing issues and had prescribed that she receive contracted services with an occupational therapist. Eventually, we had to make changes because she did, as I mentioned earlier, start leaving our program as part of, she left for part of the day to attend a different program and then would come back. So when that occurred, we did, have to review that, make changes, train our staff, and sign off on that. So what modifications, accommodations, or restrictions are needed while the child is engaged in the classroom, curriculum, and routine activities? So it's important to think that through. In the classroom, we looked at ways as part of our curriculum that we could incorporate some of the occupational therapy exercises. So we coordinated with that occupational therapist and used some of the suggestions that that she made to help support Sasha. There were some fun exercises, games, and other little tips that she suggested that we used and found helpful for all the children in our group. And so all our young preschoolers kind of benefited from this, and so it was a win-win. As I mentioned earlier, due to her underdeveloped sensory needs that were growing and changing and developing, Sasha would often have little control over her body and would bump into things or other people. Some of them suggested well, we had a coach from Center for Inclusive Childcare that actually suggested some games such as like a red light, green light that were, that we played with the group that helped our kids kind of just identify their body, their movement, and when to start and stop. And so it was a fun little game that we incorporated that, again, helped Sasha and everyone else. We had another really kind of cool thing that Sasha liked to push a lot, and because it was a need that she had a sensory need to do so, and so we created some little laminated signs that had either feet or hands traced on them, and we placed them and hung them throughout our young preschool classroom. And we taught the kids, all of the children, we said, these are available here. If you ever feel the need to push with your hands or feet, you can either lay down on the floor and put your feet up against the, where we had the little footprints, or, you can press your hands on there. And they loved it. And it was a great opportunity for all the kids to partake. It did not single out Sasha. Everybody was gaining some of that, those opportunities and that development. And so it was really fun to see how we could incorporate some of these little tips into our classroom. As I mentioned, Sasha would fall off of her chair often because she just could not sit still and the chairs just did not work for her. And so we easily fixed that. Instead of having one of those smaller preschool chairs or the bigger toddler chairs I think we had in that classroom, we brought in a little bit bigger preschool chair that had a little bit wider base and allowed her to feel more secure and not fall off the chair. So it was just simple accommodations that we made, that we did, and there were many, many more. At that time, Sasha really had a hard time settling down. And while, we sometimes recognize that, most children kind of need to quiet down to do that, what Sasha really needed was a little boost of energy before she could settle. And so we found ways within our classroom to kind of allow that to happen. We would do some higher energy activities for select groups of kids, based on our staffing needs or availability. And we would make those accommodations so that when it was rest time, she was able to settle in a little bit better. Next here on the form, it asks about what modifications, accommodations, or restrictions are needed for outdoor play, field trips, or transportation. So in our case with Sasha in our classroom, when we transitioned between inside and outside, we again incorporated many games, so that everybody would, these are common things that we already do in our classrooms, but it really did, it allowed us to kind of like specifically help identify some of the needs. We would sometimes crawl like an alligator through the short hallway so that we would not be bumping into each other, or our little runner in the group that was also in that same group would also be have a focus and be on the floor, and it was a little harder for him to get up and run away. And so just, again, talking with your staff, thinking this through, all of it is important. And then what training, staffing, or materials are needed to support the above modifications or accommodations or restrictions? And so then this is where, when you're thinking about staffing, In our situation, because there was a time that Sasha ended up participating in that early childhood special ed class for part of her days, we had to think about our staffing needs for the room. We had to figure out who was going to actually bring her to meet the bus and or pick or meet her when she came back. And so there was, we had to put a plan together, and being able to do that all on this form really helped us zero in and identify what was needed in our classroom and in our program. So we're going to move on here to, these are just, again, some of those ways you can really achieve this stuff. I know we don't have any more time here. This is in your handout, but we've talked about all of this. There are, working together, make a plan, think things through. You're creative people out there in this world, and I know that because I know a lot of the work that you do. And so recognizing that this ICCPP form is really a beneficial tool for your program is, and for the children in your care is a great way to work together and provide the information you need. Consultation, part of this type of a child care ICCPP for special need, does have to be coordinated. And so if there is that coordination with an IEP or any of the other types of plans or reports from a licensed physician or any of the other medical professionals or professionals listed in rule, then that consulting professional and the child's parents do need to participate in that annually or that annual review to ensure that the child's needs are continuing to be met. And to document that, we have an area on the form that allows for you to fill out that information, that you can obtain an electronic signature here for that professional, or if instead you have, say, the professional has provided a report with kind of their review of the plan that they coordinated with the previous, at initial consultation, when they do their review, and if they send over something with a signature and it's dated within the appropriate time, that can be used as an alternative to the professional's electronic signature. And then too, we have, well, this is actually on that initial consultation. So you could do that. We have provided an optional parent electronic signature because we no doubt understand most parents are part of the initial collaboration and consultation. And so that is there. And as I mentioned, both of those, the professionals as well as the parents during that annual review do need to sign off on it. And so a little further on in the form, you will see an area for them to actually do that verification at the yearly review. Staff that are caring for a child with an ICCPP special need that ICCPP must be reviewed and followed by all staff who interact with the child. And as mentioned earlier, there are specific training requirements, including during orientation, during in-service, and whenever there are changes that must occur and be documented. And then if there are any additional staff or staffing qualifications or training required as part of the child's ICCPP, that needs to be provided as well. And an example of that could be, like, say a child does have a feeding tube, you would want to ensure that your staff have the training that they would need to be able to use the equipment that is as part of the child's ICCPP. This just repeats all of that information. Just again, that it needs to be reviewed at least each calendar year or when updates are needed. If there are reports or documentation current and coordinated with the ICCPP from one of those consulting professionals, that they need to verify yearly that evaluation, that the needs are being met. The center representative does need to verify that the review has been done on a yearly basis. Parent signature is required to verify that yearly evaluation, and staff are required to re-verify at least each year and or if there are any changes to the plan, and then sign off that they have been trained on the ICCPP and agree to follow it after their review. So this is where you would document all of that. And as shown earlier, you know, as you walk through our forms, there are options based on each of these, you know, whether it's a yearly review with no changes or a review due to a change. And so here again, very similar to the allergy form, we have those pop-ups that occur, and that is the form. And so I just want to quickly review, you know, that, you know, I know our time is up. We're over our time, and I don't want to keep you any longer, but hopefully today we were able to help you have a better understanding of an individual childcare program plan, when it is needed, you know, what it is, where you find out more information within statute and rule, and demonstrate, you know, that using our form really, again, our form has been designed to help our license holders meet compliance requirements. And so with that, I hope that you have gained a sense of my sincere appreciation and respect for all you do for children and their families. I know that the work that you do is hard and complex. I don't want to keep you any longer, but it is also some of the most important work that you do out there, working with children. We all in our licensing division, you know, bow our heads down to the work that you do. We've all done it pretty much, and we love what you're doing. And so, while you know we are in debt in our state to you and all of your staff, and so thank you so much for taking the time and being here with us. And know that we are available. We are all working together to make things better for children in Minnesota, and you know we are partners in this. And so if you have any questions, let us know. And my internal gratitude too for your time and engagement, because I love that you've participated in the chat. And to all of our panelists and our guest speakers from the Center for Inclusive Childcare. Thank you wholeheartedly from me to all of you. Thank you all. Have a great day. Let me know if you have any questions afterwards. I will stick around and kind of peruse the chat, so I'll be on for a little bit if anybody does need anything from me directly. Thank you all. Take care.
Thanks, licensing crowd, for including us.
Oh yeah, you can still hear me. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Wow. This is like a snapshot into a day in your life, and JC and my heads are about ready to explode. I can't even imagine what you guys do every day. Oh my heavens. Wow. Impressive.
Oh.
Well, it's so nice to see you, Priscilla.
So nice to see you, Michelle. It's been far too long.
It has been a long time, but you know, this is so important. And I know there's still a few people on, and we were mad trying to get through the chat and respond to people, and I still questions, but hopefully people know they've got the handout, the recording, they've got contact information for Center for Inclusive Childcare, and then of course their licensor. I tried to put that in the chat a few times. Like, please reach out to your licensor if you're questioning what you need, because a lot of them are really, and again, you know, somebody put in there perhaps a flow chart to like guide us through the decision making, some FAQs. So
Great.
I think it left us with, yeah, a lot of thoughts about what we can do to just continue to support providers, make sure they have what they need. So
yeah,
we appreciate you being here too, Priscilla. It was really nice to partner. And did JC jump off?
I think she jumped off, but
yeah.
Truly, thank you for including us. We really appreciate it. Lisa, have a great time in Hawaii, and
Yeah.
well done, everyone.
Thank you. I would love to spend even more time kind of going through everything, and I know it was a lot, but
it's a lot.
So many details. And I guess the takeaway is, you know, we really worked hard to kind of create the form so that it would be intuitive and useful.
Yeah, and now they've seen it, they walked through it, and now it's just reaching out to their licensors and their individual supports that are available. So
Yes.
have a great rest of your day. I hope you can relax.
Thank you
everybody.
as well. Take
Bye.
care. Bye.